Hello everybody, welcome to Traveling with Legos, a video show about two of my favorite things, Traveler and Legos. So why this concept? Well, first, I really love both Travelers and Legos, as I said. Second of all, I saw a lot of photos and videos of Dwarven Forge, maps, and dioramas for fantasy settings, but they don't really do anything for science fiction. And short of starting my own company to build science fiction walls and miniatures, I looked around and said Legos would actually do quite a good job. Not only that, but they're so versatile because you can take them apart, so we could just build model after model without spending a small fortune trying to achieve those aims. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to put together some Lego models of Traveler. Along the way, we're going to talk a lot about Traveler because that is really, the focus of me, Traveler and role-playing games in general. So, today's show is going to be pretty basic. We're just going to tackle two subjects. Scale, which we well know is important when talking about Traveler, and then we're going to look at the air raft, which is a pretty basic and tropish thing about Traveler. So, first, let's talk about scale. In this image I'm putting up on the bottom right hand side of the screen, you basically see an elevation of a Lego figure inside a 4x4 area of Legos. If you look at the figure, you will notice that he fits quite well in that area. In Traveler on deck plans, 1 ton is translated into roughly an area of 1.5 meters squared, and so I had to kind of come up with that same concept. Another way to look at a square in a Traveler deck plan is it fits one humanoid. So I used those two things to develop the concept that when dealing with Legos, a 4x4 pip, as showed on that image or on this video close-up, 4x4 pips seems to match an area of 1.5 meters. So that's important to see. Also on the image of the elevation, you can see he fits pretty tight inside that area. That happens to be 5 Lego bricks high. If you were to add the 6, you would actually do what Traveler says to be about right for a level, which is said to be 1.5 squares high, or roughly 2 meters high. And 5 is a close, tight fit. 6 Lego blocks would make it roughly 2 meters tall. And so that's what you're looking at when you're looking at the height of a deck plan, either 5 or 6. If you go above that, then you're starting to scale up into, wide open areas. So we're going to work in the 5 to 6 areas depending on how cramped we want this deck to be. And also it's important for playability, as we'll see in future shows. The next thing I want to then talk about is the air raft. In this image I just put on the screen, you see a circa 1980s miniature of a Traveler air raft. The air raft has been with us since classic Traveler and stretches all the way through all the versions of Traveler up through T5 and Mongoose Traveler. Without it, you got a different flavor of the game. The air raft is an anti-grav vehicle. It's designed for both surface travel and from orbit down onto the surface, depending on whether or not you have vac suits or if it's a closed vehicle. If you look at the image, there are several features, design features we got to keep in mind when building. So we got to tackle that first before we actually talk about building the air raft. The first thing you can see on the image is that it has some aerodynamic front end things that we got to kind of try to capture and try to see what it is. The second thing you can see on the image is the windshield. Next you can see it's got seating for 4. In my case I have 3 miniatures, but I still have seating for 4. And then it's got a circular area on the back end, and which I seem to think would be a radar or an antenna. And then it's got, if you look closely, something that looks like radiators preventing heat or other things. Because we are talking about anti-grav there. Who knows what that could be? So when building the model, we got to keep those design features in mind, and I think we did a pretty good job of capturing that. If you look at this video, we've got it all in there. So let's actually talk about building the aircraft. The first thing you got to talk about is scale. As we did earlier, a standard aircraft is seen by not only the drawings of the aircraft, but also the standard scout ship and other hangar bays on other ships. Seems to be about 3 squares long by 2 squares wide. This aircraft happens to be roughly 10 pips or 2.5 squares wide by roughly 3 squares long. So it's almost a perfect fit for an aircraft, not quite. That has to deal with the spacing needed to fit the figures in the aircraft. And we'll talk about that at the end of the next segment. The next segment is me talking about building the aircraft itself. Instead of boring you to death with me putting together a Lego model in front of you and watching my difficulties, I decided to just film me putting it together and then talking about some highlights of each stage. So let's go ahead and watch that video. Alright, the first stage is putting together the base. You can see that we have established that base that I talked about earlier for scale. Then we put on the first side wall. That's designed to reinforce the side, reinforce it, plus give it some character. The next part of the video is me putting together the other side, so you can see that it's actually made out of different components designed to layer together to make that side strong, so that when you put it on the base, it helps to reinforce the base. You can see in this model several clear Legos of different colors, running lights, just things to add character to it. So here we are putting on the second side. The next stage of design was building the back end. As you watch me build that back end, you'll notice that it's hollow. I chose that for because of the availability of Legos that I have. So we can talk about that when we get to the next stage of this show. You'll notice that I'm pushing down pretty hard here. That's to ensure that they stay together. Legos do have a tendency to fall apart, so you got to watch that. So a good pressure will help that, making sure that they snap tight. So here we go. We're almost done building the back end, and again, you'll see me pushing pretty hard, making sure that back end is a solid fit. Now we're building the front of the starship, or the aircraft, excuse me. You can tell it's a pretty complicated thing, and it was. It took me about 5 tries to get the exact arrangements of seats, to controls, to front end aerodynamics, to the windshield, to make that all fit seamlessly and smoothly and realistically. So that was kind of complicated. One of the things I really like about the controls is that in the process of building it, I discovered that I had this windscreen up top, or this monitor-like thing, and on it said Bounty, which was kind of funny because all I could think of was that the 4 figures in the aircraft were out searching for a bounty, which is a classic Traveler trope setting. We put in the seatings in the video, and now we're putting in the miniatures. As you can see when I just showed you the video, you got to make sure those figures are in there tight still, because they're going to fall out if they're not in there tight, or if you put pressure in too many different directions. So always watch that. Also, you can see me laying out their hands and their weapons to make sure that they fit within the aircraft, and we'll talk about that in the next part of the video. Keep all that in mind. And now the video is just about ended, and we can start talking about the next thing, and that's modifying the aircraft. Some of the things you got to keep in mind is that Legos are kind of bland, so you got to add modifications to them, make them exciting. One of the things I did in this model was that I added these side blankings to give it more shape. They've also got some more running lights on them and clearer pictures. I've added radiator panels on the back end to give that radiator look. You can barely see them because they're black. Don't build black on black if you want detail. So that's one thing. The other thing you got to keep in mind is that arm width. We talked about that when we were talking, or the arm width. We talked about that when we looking at building walls. The same thing applied here. If we wanted to build this as a hardtop, we'd actually have to expand this out one more to either side, and that would really mess up the scaling to the air raft and to the air raft bays on ships. So in the future, we're probably going to keep it to a convertible air raft for scaling's sake when we build other models. The other thing we talked about in the video was the hollowness of the back end. If you could have the right hinge on the back, you could actually make that back end open up, and you could use it as a trunk, or you could add some control paneling in there to model out a electrical engine of some sort, or just other things. I actually ended up leaving it hollow and didn't put on the hinge because I wanted stability, and I just couldn't see any need for that in play. You can just say that we're fixing the engine. We don't have to open up the back end, the backside for a trunk or for an engine. All right. So that's really the short end of building an air raft. You got to think about scale, then you got to look at design things, and then you just got to start, playing around to make sure that you've got the model together. Make sure that you have layering, and we're going to talk about that as we talk about other models in the future. And that brings us to the close of the show, the last segment, and that's the future show. To start with, the next model I'm working on is the modular cutter. I figured that was a great next step. For one thing, its size. It has almost the same length as the other ships we'll be building, which include the Scout ship, the Free Trader, the subsidized trader, maybe things like the patrol craft, the X-boat, the X-boat tender, all those things, all scaled to about the same length, though they're much wider or have different shapes you have to deal with. Some have more decks. All of that, adds complexity and leads us into talking about more things. But the modular cutter, being a straight shape, really is a great place to start. At this stage of the modular cutter, I'm about 2/3 of the way done. I have the bricks in to build the superstructure of the bridge, which takes a lot of work because of its curved nature. I'm going to attempt that, and then we'll be ready to start talking about it. The next show we will work on the first stage of it, which is the actual module and the exterior of that. And then we'll just do this in stages because it's just so big. A yard long. It's really big, and showing you one video that being put together would just take too much time to do. So we'll do it in stages. We'll also just talk about Traveler. We'll talk about character generation. We'll talk about the different campaign settings, the different rule settings. We will talk about just all sorts of things, because that's Traveler. That's what's great about a role-playing game. There's lots of things to talk about. We can talk about our favorite Traveler. I prefer Classic Traveler or even 5th Edition Traveler. We can also talk about, since we're going to be dealing with miniatures, we'll end up talking about Snapshot and Azanti High Lightning and how they differ from Traveler rules that normally use range bands versus action point systems. All of that we're going to talk about through this show. So each show is going to get longer, going to get more complicated. Join us in chat so we can talk together. I just plan to make this a really great show about my favorite role-playing game, Traveler. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you the next time. Bye.